This is going to be a brief overview of oil pastels, an introduction, if you will. I've got my oil pastels that I'm using laid out before me. You can see they're in all different sizes. Some are full stick, some are partial stick, some look kind of nasty and dirty and everything. So if you're worried you don't have a perfect set, believe me, it's almost better to have them kind of worn in a little bit. If they have the wrapper off them, they're going to get a little contaminated. But you're going to use the tips anyway. A couple of things you're going to want to have on hand as you're working with the oil pastels is if you want to have a nice point on them, you can use a handheld pencil sharpener to sharpen them, and also a Kleenex for either cleaning your fingers, because your fingers are going to get pretty dirty, and also for cleaning the tips of your oil pastels, because as you're blending colors, as you can see from this one here, I was using it over some red, and so it's got some red on it. So if I want to use it with a yellow and I don't want to transfer that red onto my yellow, I'm going to need to take my Kleenex and kind of clean it off. If you don't have a Kleenex, here's another one. It's got some light blue on this purple. Sometimes I'll just wipe them off on my hand, the back of my hand, palm of my hand, or whatever works in a pinch. You can just simply do it with your fingers as well, or rub it on a scrap piece of paper, but it's a little bit easier with a Kleenex. So that's going to be handy for cleaning those off, so you don't get cross-contamination when you don't want it. And then feel free to peel these. As you can see, some of the paper has been peeled right off. I mean, don't do it on all of them. The nice thing about the paper is it does keep them together. Sometimes they do get broken, which is fine, because if you need a real small piece, if you want to break one, that's fine, because sometimes you maybe want to cover a large area. Let's say, let me clean this off. Yeah, I'll pretend this is scrap paper. And if you want to clean off the whole side, just take it and roll it around. You can see some of the other colors coming off there. And clean up the side, and then maybe finish it off. Once your fingers get on there, it kind of warms up the material and makes it easier to kind of wipe it off, get it clean. Because sometimes if you want to cover a broad area lightly, you want to skim over the surface, it's good to use the side of the crayon. So you can skim over the surface like this. Now eventually you're going to want that all solid. But say you're going to blend a couple of colors, say I just you want to leave some white space for the other color to blend in there with it. And let's say, I'm going to blend some of this blue with that. Okay. Clean my blue off here. And then I'll, scumble some blue over the top of that. Maybe I'll come back with my yellow. Okay, and eventually, blend it more and more, going back and forth. But eventually you're going to need to go in and kind of fill in between, and then you can blend it with a white or whatever. It's not too often that you're really going to use the side of the crayon. That's only in a circumstance where you want to add a little bit of color to something. Let's say I had it mostly blue like this. Maybe I want just a little bit of this yellow on there. So, but I want to spread it evenly. So if I use the broad surface, I can evenly spread just a little bit of that yellow-orange on there. And then I come back in, and maybe that's all I want, because now I'm going to finish blending it with my blue and just kind of blend that in. I didn't want to change it too much. I just wanted to change it a little bit, so I skim the side of that crayon over it. And but not too often will you do that. But if you need to, sometimes it's handy to use the side of a crayon, so you might want something small like that. And then, like I said, with your pencil sharpener, feel free to stick them in there and sharpen them up. If you need to do some detailed work, and you want a nice fine point, like say you're outlining something or you're doing small shapes and you really need that detail, feel free to sharpen those. Another way to get fine lines too is if you still have a square edge, okay, you can use the edge of that crayon to make a nice line where you can kind of see where the edge is going to go, unless you have a tip. Sometimes from coloring you end up creating a point, but so that works too. But the nice thing about sharpening is you can have a little bit more control. You can see where your tip is, whereas when you have this big chunky point, it's hard to see where your exact point is. So that gives you a little bit more control doing that. And general blending, because we're going to be doing some blending of colors. You generally want to start with your lighter color if you're going to blend a couple of colors. Let's take the light blue for instance. Well, let me show you what happens when you don't, if you start with the dark. If you start with the dark and you completely saturate the paper with that darker color, the lighter color isn't going to do a whole lot. Okay? Because this surface, it's kind of this impermeable layer. Once it gets so saturated with the oil pastel, it's like this oily barrier that won't allow much of another color to mix with it, especially light over dark. So, but if you do go completely saturate the surface with a lighter color, you can obviously, darken it, which makes sense. Okay, so a lot of times it's better to start, but you can start with a dark color. You just may have to go lightly over the surface, like that, leave lots of white space so that the lighter color can then kind of get in there. Another thing too with blending, you notice, excuse me, my first one here I used all horizontal strokes, so it ends up with all these streaks in there. And sometimes you might want that, and that's okay, because maybe you want to show direction on something if you're curving over a hill, let's say. But the one way to blend that in so that you don't have the streaks is go in the opposite direction. So you kind of blend that. So even as I go this way and I start to blend this, if I go in the opposite direction, I'm going to get a little bit better blending, more even, without all the streaks in it. Because even when I start to blend this, you can still see some of those streaks are showing through. And that's fine. That little bit of texture, it looks sort of painterly, and that's not a big deal either. But depending on what you're going for, if you go a little bit lighter, it's easier to start with start with the light and add the dark over the top of it. If you do want to start with the dark, you may just want to go over the surface lightly and then come back in with your lighter color. Okay? And then your lighter colors really become your blending colors as well, kind of like your blending stick. Okay, say I want to do a gradient here. All right, I'm going to go dark here at the bottom. I'm going to fade that in. And then I'm going to come in with my lighter color and use that to sort of blend everything together. Now you can always adjust it again. I can come in with a darker, say I want to extend my dark area of my gradient a little bit further. Sometimes it's just hard to blend, that darker area in, so then you have to finish it off with your lighter color, because the lighter doesn't show as much on top of the dark as the dark shows on top of the light. So your lighter color becomes your blending color. Whoops, see there, I broke it again because it's not in the paper. And then obviously white, if you want to make everything overall a lot lighter. Cleaning off my white here. The white also works like a blending stick as well. But sometimes you can see as I fade that out, it shows a little bit too much, and I don't want that streakiness. I may have to come back in and go the opposite direction with my lighter color, which is kind of becomes my middle value. So a lot of times you're dealing with a light middle or medium, and dark value. And your middle value is a lot of times your blending color. So I have this light blue, which has become even lighter by mixing it with the white, so that becomes my light blue, really, not so much white, light blue, even a little bit darker light blue, and then darker blue still. So those are just some general guidelines for blending and working with the colors and layering the colors. You can put other colors in there once it's even once you have it, you know, fully saturated with color. It depends on what color it is. If it's a dark enough color, like say I wanted to change the overall tone, say I wanted this blue more of a blue-green blue, I can lightly go over the surface with some green evenly, and then maybe come back again with my light blue, you know, and blend that. And now I've created more of a, you know, change that color altogether. This is again glazing like we did with our colored pencils. I glazed some green over top of it, used my blue to blend it, and now I've got more of kind of like an aqua or blue-green blue, or whatever. I mean, you can take a, you know, a yellowish color even, and, you know, see what you get there, blend that in. I really don't like that, but that's what experimentation is for. I think because I had so much orange in it, it really dulled everything. It wasn't just yellow. Might have got a better result if I just used yellow, but. And anyway, and sometimes you may not want to fill the entire area with a color. Maybe you just want to have maybe a little bit of, say I take this pink, and I want a little pink here, and I want a little pink there. You know, you just want some scattering of color in there. And that's fine too. You know, instead of covering the whole thing so that it looks kind of more tie-dye like. I don't know how well that's showing up on the camera. But I'm going to show you what we're going to do. That's just some general guidelines, and I'll show you what you're going to do for practice in the next video.